Hello, welcome to another talk on the First Seminole War. I want to talk about uh, what happened 100 or 206 years ago, the destruction of Fowltown and the Scott Massacre, which uh, really there's maybe some argument among the historians on what actually started the First Seminole War. Well, once this happened, it was pretty much a given. Everything would start from there because there was no turning back at that point. Let me do a share screen if I can of here we are. This is a historical marker village of Fowltown, and it's been painted and moved to a safe location. It used to be alongside the road. This used to be it here, and unless you knew it was there, you'd drive right by and not see it. And also the trees behind it, they're gone now. Hurricane Michael blew them away. And this is actually what the marker looked like after I cleaned it real good. And this is Fort Scott. This involved two. And go back to our marker here. On November 21st, 1817, the United States had constructed Fort Scott up on the confluence of the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, and Flint River. And further up the Flint River, just a few miles, was Fowltown. In fact, Fowltown was close enough as pretty much considered walking distance from Fort Scott, except they went around kind of the long way around what's today Bainbridge. And on November 21st, General Gaines, he wanted to have Neamathula come talk to him about some problems that they've been having, attacks along the white settlements. Neamathula said he had nothing more to tell General Gaines. He had nothing to say. The Treaty of Fort Jackson did not apply to him because he was not at those treaty talks. And so Gaines sent a command of soldiers under Major David Twiggs to capture Neamathula, show of force. They arrived at the town. The men were actually away at the time. A few were there, and the soldiers they started raid the town, but the men showed up and started firing back. So pretty much drove Twiggs's command away. The soldiers came back 2 days later on November 23rd, this time with about 300 soldiers under the command of Colonel Matthew Arbuckle. Matthew Arbuckle's famous out in the west at Fort Gibson. He was in charge of the 7th Infantry, and he was kind of in charge of Indian Territory for about 30 years. So they came back on the 23rd at Fowltown. This time the town was deserted and they looted and burned the town. And the Georgia militia took all the food, some of the food supply and cattle, and drove them to Fort Gaines. And that really ticked off the Indians. Um, so they went and attacked a army convoy coming up the river. Let's see if I can show you where the marker is here. Hold on, share screen again. Okay, this is Google Maps. And you can see Chattahoochee, Florida here, this line. You see the Georgia-Florida border on the Faceville Highway that goes from Chattahoochee up to Bainbridge. The historical marker for Fort Scott is kind of on the end of the roadway to Hutchinson's Ferry, uh, right near Lake Seminole, what is now the marina there. It used to be Jack Wingate's fish camp. I can't remember what they call it nowadays. And across the river would be Fort Scott. And Fowltown would be a few miles upriver over here. So the soldiers, if now Lake Seminole was not there. Lake Seminole was built like in the early 1950s. So the river wasn't as wide, but still the soldiers to attack Fowltown, they had to come up to what's now Bainbridge, cross there and come down. And the historical marker, it's been moved to this corner, Faceville Highway and Green Shade Road. Let's do a satellite image here. Okay, let's take a look at that. Okay, get our street view. Yep, here's the Faceville Highway, and that's Green Shade Road here to the left. And there's like a little church building there. You see right here is the historical markers. And now there's a place you can actually pull over to the side and get out and read them. So that's pretty cool. They're at a accessible place for once, not at the former dangerous place that they once were. So now I'm going to read the letter that General Gaines wrote to the Secretary of War. What happened? The image behind me is known as the Scott Massacre. And here's what happened. This was in retaliation to what happened in Fowltown. Uh, so I don't. So I'm going to actually read the letter here. Let's. Oh yeah, got bad reflection. But this is a photocopy from the microfilm of the actual letter. You can kind of see it right there. Now, I might be stumbling through it because it's all, cursive writing, but it's not too hard to read. This General Gaines to Secretary of War John C. Calhoun, Headquarters, Fort Scott, Georgia, December 2nd, 1817. This is 2 days later. Sir, I have the honor to receive on the 26th your communication of the 30th of October. I am very happy to find that the President approves of my movement, but I much regret that his just expectations as to the effect was reason to believe would I be uh, produced on the minds of the Indians uh, by this movement. I'm sorry, yeah, stumble have not been realized. Oh, let's start over. I'm happy to find that the president approves of my movement, but I much regret that his expectations as to the effect there was reason to believe would be produced on the minds of the Indians by this movement have not been realized. I am now quite convinced that the hostility of these Indians is and has long since been so deep a character as to have no ground to calculate upon the tranquility or the future serenity of our frontier settlements until the towns south and east of this place have received a signal proof of our ability and willingness to retaliate for every outrage. It is now my painful duty to report an affair of the more serious and dis- deceivous nature that has herefore occurred, and which leaves no doubt of the necessity of immediate application of force and active measures on our part. A large party of Seminole Indians on the 30th ultimatum formed an ambuscade upon the Apalachicola River a mile below this junction of the Flint and Chattahoochee, attacked one of our boats ascending the shore and killed, wounded, and took the greater part of the detachment consisting of 40 men commanded by Lieutenant R.W. Scott, that's Richard Scott, of the 7th Infantry. There were now also on board, killed or taken, 7 women, the wives of the soldiers. 6 men of the detachment only escaped, 4 of whom were wounded. They report that the strength of the current at the point of the attack had obliged the lieutenant to keep his boat near the shore, that the Indians had found along the bank of the river and were not discovered until fire their fire commenced, in the first volley of which Lieutenant Scott and his most valuable men fell. So that was on the Chattahoochee River, a mile south of the confluence, or a mile south of Fort Scott. They are bringing supplies up the river with some sick soldiers, infirm soldiers, and some of the women of the post. And I imagine that it didn't look too unlike you see on the background behind me as the boat was coming up, and uh, they were not rowing there. What they were doing, they were pulling the boat along. They would get a rope and wrap it around a tree and pull it forward. And this was a very slow process. And I think this also happened at night. So they were ambushed at night, maybe about 500 warriors, uh, not only the ones from Fowltown, but Miccosukee Town, just a large contingent, Seminole, Miccosukee, Black Seminoles probably too. Oh, and the boat was commanded by Richard Scott, and he was killed at this battle. The lieutenant and his party had been sent from this place some days before to assist Major Muhlenberg in ascending the river with 3 vessels laden with military stores brought from Montgomery and Mobile. The major, instead of retaining the party to assist him, as I had advised, retained only about 20 men, and in their place put a like number of sick with the women and some regimental clothing. The boat thus laden was detached along for this place. It is due to Major Muhlenberg to observe that at the time he detached the boat, I have reason to believe he was not apprised of the recent hostilities having taken place in this quarter. It appears, however, from Lieutenant Scott's letter received about the hour in which he was attacked, that he had been warned of the danger. Upon receipt of this letter, I had 2 boats fitted with covers and port for port side for defense, and detached Captain Clinch with an officer and 40 men with an order to secure movement of Lieutenant Scott, and then to assist. So what happened is, I guess Major Muhlenberg, he moved around the cargo and the boats and sent them ahead, commanded by Lieutenant Scott. Muhlenberg's actually with the keel boats down the river, and he'll get attacked too. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Scott had heard at one of the stops along the river, one of the friendly Indians, I think it was John Yellow Hair, uh, that the Indians, what they referred to as the hostiles, were preparing to ambush their boat, but Lieutenant Scott was still under orders, so he still had to proceed, and hopefully he was hoping he had enough firepower. So they went up the river and they were attacked, um, and wiped out, as we'll see in the layer. At the same time, they were sending down Captain Clinch with some keel boats that they'd armored up to go down and and rescue Lieutenant Scott. What they didn't know when they left, that Lieutenant Scott had already been wiped out. In fact, Captain Clinch's boats passed the smoldering boats of Lieutenant Scott along the Chattahoochee landing here in the middle of the night. Now, Captain Clinch is not related to General Duncan Clinch, just to make that clear. Back to the letter. Major Muhlenberg, uh, okay, that their Lieutenant Scott was then to assist Major Muhlenberg. This detachment embarked late in the evening of the 30th and must have passed the scene of the action below at night and some hours after the affair terminated. So that's Clint, Captain Clinch's keelboat. They passed at night. I have not yet heard from Captain Clinch. I shall immediately strengthen the detachment under Major Muhlenberg with another boat secured against the enemy fire. He will therefore move up with safety by keeping near the middle of the river. Okay, so I guess Major Muhlenberg had actually arrived at the fort ahead of Scott here. I shall, moreover, take a position with my principal force at the junction of the rivers near the line. They're talking about the line between Georgia and Spanish Florida, and shall attack any force that may attempt to interrupt our vessels and supplies below. As I feel persuaded by order of the President prohibiting attack upon the Indians below this line has reference only to the past and not to the present or the future outrages, such as the one just now perpetrated, and such as shall place our troops straight within the pale of natural law, where self defense is sanctioned by the principles of self preservation. So Gaines pretty much had orders previous from Secretary of War Calhoun, said, don't go below the line unless you've been attacked or you see a need to attack the Seminoles. And that was the same direction that General Jackson used with force about 4 months later. The wounded men who made their escape concur in the opinion that they had seen upwards of 500 hostile warriors at different places below the point of attack. Of the force engaged, they differ in opinion, but all agree that the number was very considerable, extending about 150 yards along the shore in the edge of the swamp or thick woods. I am assured by the friendly chiefs that the hostile warriors of every town upon the Chattahoochee prepared canoes and pushed off downriver to join the Seminoles. As some of the account of my movement from the Alabama reached them. The Indians now remaining upon the Chattahoochee, I have reason to believe, are well disposed. One of the new settlers, however, has recently been killed, but it has been clearly proven that the murder had belonged to the hostile party. The friendly chiefs in the neighborhood, when appraised of the murder, assembled a party and sent to pursue the offenders, followed him to the Flint River on the route to Miccosukee, whither he escaped. Onis Hadjo and several other friendly chiefs have offered me their services with the warriors to go against the Seminoles. I have promised to give them notice of the time that may be fixed for my departure and then to accept their services. The enclosure contains the substance of what I have said to the chiefs who have visited me, several of whom reside south of Spanish Line and west of the Apalachicola River. It was expected by the chiefs that I should communicate to them my views and wishes. I felt authorized to say but little, but I deemed it necessary in what I should say to endeavor to counteract the erroneous impressions by which they have been misled by the pretended British agents. So they're so Gaines is of the belief that the British are exciting these hostilities. I hope the president will see in what I have said nothing to disapprove. I am fully persuaded a report of the various talks which I have received from the chiefs would show the propriety of what I have said to them. Such a report I have not a moment's time now to make. The Indians are at this moment firing at our camp from the opposite side of the river. I have the honor to be most respectfully your obedient servant, Edmund P. Gaines, Major General by brevet, commanding to the Honorable Secretary of War, Washington City. That's General Gaines's report. He's actually writing it under fire. And that affair gave General Jackson the reason to come down in Florida and go into Spanish Florida as the first Seminole War. And you kind of know the rest of that story for now. I mean, we talked about in the past and we will in the future. But attacking the military transport gave Jackson the provocation to come into Florida. Well, I think that's enough for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.